Hello and welcome to Culture Illiterate, a podcast where four friends overthink comic book movies. I am Jake. I don't like when the volume is on an odd number. It feels like odd numbers feel like half numbers to me. Like a 25 is really just halfway between 24 and 26. So I'll tend to make people put it on, or at least when it's on my own TV, set it to an even number. With me are my friends and fellow co-hosts.
That was a long-winded fun fact. My name is Jason, and I have been Batman for Halloween not once, but twice. Once as a child and once as an adult.
Cool. My name's Matt. Sometimes I get really close to the mic and talk very loudly so that I can fuck with Jake when he tries to edit the audio, just so I can get him back for his main character syndrome.
I am Sean. My fun fact is that I have, for the first time recently, made mashed potatoes. Having lived by myself, I never had
Sean
any.
did all the work. Wow. You won't care by Lucy?
I don't drag my fiance like that. I just never had any want to make it living alone, so it's the first time, and I feel ashamed.
I love mashed potatoes.
I do too.
I'm Dan, also known as Dan Drambles on YouTube. I'm a video essayist and a movie producer, well, series producer at the minute. Fun fact, piggybacking off the numbers thing, I have an even more precise thing with numbers in that I like even numbers, except for the number 6, which is evil, but the number 7 is the replacement number for 6 that I do like, so I like even numbers and 7, 8 odd numbers and 6.
That's interesting. I love the number 3. I always lock my car 3 times when I exit it. So I think that might be a mental illness thing, but we don't have to get into that.
Thank you for being on. Before we even get any further, do you want to plug any of your work right away?
Oh, if you're open to that, I certainly can. So, I guess sort of the two big projects, the one that's just finished and the one that's coming up, would be my YouTube stuff, Wholesome Halloween. I've just wrapped on the third and final marathon, a video essay series where every single day for the whole month of October, I'd upload a different video essay covering a topic of horror for that day. Usually a film, not always. Sometimes it was a book, sometimes it was like something weird and different, like I did one on wrestling and horror, and I did one on horror wrestling, and that just kind of came to its 100th episode and ended fully with a big emotional sort of send-off for me. I'm very, very proud of it, and you should all definitely go check out that marathon. I put my heart and soul into it. It's hundreds of thousands of words long, over 15 hours of juicy content, as the internet likes to call it, because that's what everything is these days. And outside of that, my big thing at the minute is I'm working with Creator VC. They are the company that put out the mega documentary series In Search of Darkness. If you don't know what that is, it's a franchise of 3 films, coming up 4 films, on 80s horror. And they are these 5-hour-long massive mega documentaries that put together this whole curated museum experience of the entire decade of 80s horror, and they, along the route of exploring these films, talk to the people who made them, the people who did makeup, the people who acted in them, and just create this huge kind of cultural retrospective. And I work with those guys now, and I am actually development producer on their next big project, which is a sort of spin-off of In Search of Darkness, that instead of looking at 80s horror, it's going to look at horror video games. It's called Terabytes, the evolution of horror gaming, and pre-sales go out next February.
That's a lot of things coming out to look forward in your world. I can say I'm mostly aware of you through Wholesome Halloween, and I can attest that is the episodes I've seen are very, very entertaining. And I don't typically like long-form YouTube videos because I have a really short attention span, but I can attest to that being worth the watch.
Yeah, I think the trick is to dress like a skeleton.
Yeah, maybe that is
the attention more. Like, you could talk about, like, accountants and nobody be interested, but if a man dressed as a skeleton is talking about accountancy, you're like, oh shit, that dude dressed as a skeleton. I guess I better pay attention to him.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a very fair point. I've never thought of it quite that way, but I guess that's why you're in that business.
Yeah, I know. I guess we can all kind of jump into with like Jake and I, or Jake more or less got us into watching your videos actually. As it's been a couple years since I started to get into your videos. It was actually Jake who, if little, I guess, more of a fun fact that will help give context. Jake and I have been friends since we were 5 or so, and I did not like him on the first day. And ever since then, we've been friends forever. But yes, Jake, I can't remember when exactly. It wasn't like it had to have been like 2 years ago, where I think it was. What was it? I'm trying to. Was it Wholesome Halloween that got me into? That you mentioned it, Jake? I can't remember. You had mentioned that you had been watching Dan's videos, and you talked about it to me, and after that, I started watching a couple, and I got more into.
To cheat on a rec, I don't know if this counts, but yeah, I would say definitely recommend Dan's stuff. But at the risk of making it a little bit, I don't know how I feel about praise. I don't know if that makes you uncomfortable. But the first video of yours I ever saw was actually your Fant 4 stick.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that one too. Yeah,
That was like actually popular.
Jake showed me that video, and it made me laugh so hard when you were like talking about things that should have middles, and you were like Malcolm's fucking movies. It was so good.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a
so,
reference.
I mean,
that I think I did. That was when my YouTube channel like started to take off. I think I did a Jurassic World video that kind of like spiked up, and then Fantastic Four, I think made the front page of Reddit, and from that point I just kind of went boom, and like very very quickly accumulated a lot of subscribers and a lot of views, and then I maintained that for a while, and I realized it was really really hard to keep up the cynical shtick when you're not actually cynical about things often. Like, I'm actually very positive about this art form that I love, and proceeded to make much more positive content, which the algorithm deemed a lot less friendly. But I'm a lot more satisfied with it. So yeah, you are old school. I wasn't even called Dan Drambles then. I was going by DD Glasses TV. Which
I recall that.
fucking name.
Yeah.
In the world. I hated it.
I've been watching you since then. Wholesome Halloween is I understand why you're capping it at 3, but has been wonderful. But yeah, just to bring it back to just definitely recommend Dan's videos, because it's the only like film reviews and video essays that have made me shed tears. In particular, the La La Land review has been something I've gone back to on a bad day before, and what was I gonna say?
I'm still friends with that girl.
And then
I'm not with her, obviously. We're part of ways. She's moved back to America and stuff now. But yeah, like we've both got new partners. I think I know she's married now. But yeah, we're still on good terms. It was good. It was a good
nice.
period of my life, and I'm glad the La La Land review and the sort of sentiment behind it has kind of hit where it's supposed to, I guess.
Yeah, that, and then more recently, having never watched a second of wrestling, the Bray Wyatt video tribute was wonderful, as was just the whole of Wholesome Halloween. So that I'll stop fanboying.
Yeah, listen, we're not gonna say anything nice about Dan. We're not saying anything nice about Dan for the rest of the podcast. Jake capped it there.
Just talking shit. But I'm glad you get to be on an episode where we're covering a good movie in The Dark Knight. Because we still haven't said it. That's the topic for today, The Dark Knight. Because man, it's a lot more fun making these things when it's something we can speak positively about.
Yeah, the bad ones really drag.
Anything they want to add now that I'm done before we move into that topic?
Well, I would like to rec a band real quick that I saw recently. I went and saw a band called Touche Amore. for the first time in my life. I've loved that band since I was like 13 years old. I'm 21 now, so 8 years later, I finally got to see them, and it was just a very, very emotional experience for me. Their lead singer is, I think, one of the best lyricists of all time. So if you like hardcore emo kind of music at all, they have some of the most emotionally impactful music I've ever heard. Like, some of their lyrics just give me chills every time I hear them, and they gave me chills when I saw them live. And they're a great live band, so definitely, if you're into that kind of scene, check it out.
I have a rec as well. I'm gonna make it short because Jake took so long. So I recommend Monarch. Monarch is the show in the MonsterVerse, which, you know, is better known for movies like Godzilla 2014 and Godzilla King of the Monsters. And it is one of those shows that surprisingly has a strong narrative. As someone who watches grown men in rubber suits fight each other, it is very strange when I see something of that media have very strong stories and very strong characters. And that's what Monarch is. It has a really strong premise, it has really strong characters, it has a really interesting ongoing mystery. I don't know if it has a payoff, because the show is not over yet. But, from what I've seen so far, it's pretty good. And if you don't trust me, which you shouldn't, you can trust Sean, because Sean likes it as well.
Yeah, that wasn't going to be my rec, but we can go with that too. I was going to rec another Godzilla content. If you are able to, I guess this is coming out way later, so it probably won't be available in theaters anymore, but Godzilla Minus One, fantastic movie, is actually surprisingly good. I know.
Oh, that's tragic.
I don't know what it is with distribution when it comes to Toho, or what their I know with in America anyways, at the very least, they have like their international distribution company that it goes through. But if you have a way of seeing it, it's genuinely really good. And just like Matt said, it has a strong narrative hook on top of just also being a Godzilla movie. In the end, it feels like a good Godzilla movie, but it also just feels like a really good movie too.
Yeah, it is also good for the reasons I stated before, as in it has strong characters and a very strong narrative. It doesn't have the mystery element, but you can see Godzilla blow up shit, so.
That's what you're here for, right?
Exactly. Watching a radioactive dinosaur shoot giant lasers out.
Right. You come for that. Everything else is an added bonus.
Exactly. Also watching giant light giants fight other monsters as well. It's Ultraman, by the way, for those who don't know.
I didn't know, and I still don't know, because I don't know who Ultraman is. But
I'm going to apologize to the guests because I'm going full geek mode right now. Full weeb mode. Right now.
well, this podcast is kind of full geek mode.
Don't need to apologize for Godzilla fan, and I am literally looking at like imported Godzilla figurines just off the side of the camera, and have Godzilla art that I've brought from Godzilla comic book artists. Like we're on the same page, you know. I'm like very into that scene. Like I want to see Jet Jaguar get like American sort of interpretation in these weird like team up Showa era style movies that seem to be doing now with like the new ones. So yeah, like, you know, don't apologize for liking Godzilla. He's fucking awesome. It's great.
Sean, he's one of us.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you and Sean, y'all are cut from the same cloth.
I mean, you guys might have missed it because I was planning to make it a whole series, but I did one episode and was like, oh, that was really hard, and didn't do it ever again. But I did actually plan to do a series on Tokusatsu. There is a single episode on my channel called Total Toku, and it is on a film called Hentai Kamen, which is not as weird as it sounds. But it's very, very good. It's very fun. And in that, I talk a lot about like the history of Tokusatsu and like how there's like 3 different branches of it, and kind of talk about like special effects movies with Godzilla, and then I sort of talk about the Power Rangers angle. And yeah, so I'm very, very much a big weirdo for that stuff.
I love you already.
Well, then let's talk about cape shit, which I'm a big weirdo for. Cut me off if I'm stopping anybody short of saying something they wanted to say, as per usual.
No, I'm
I'll throw it a red.
Dark Knight.
I'll throw
Oh
a red.
yeah, go for it.
Everybody else.
Hell yeah.
Slay the Princess. It's a visual novel where you are awakened in the woods and a narrator tells you, hey, the princess in that cabin, you gotta kill her. If you don't kill her, the world's gonna end. And you're like, well, that doesn't seem fair. Like, I don't want to kill the princess. And he's like, no, you got to. You got to kill this princess. And if you don't kill her, then everything will cease to exist. And do not trust her. Do not believe a word she says. She is going to manipulate you. She is going to be evil. Do not fall for her tricks. And then it's just up to you to make choices from that basic setup. And it does some very weird, very interesting things with this very basic premise that you are just a dude in the woods by a cabin who has to kill a princess. And you're not sure if you want to. But yeah, it's well worth exploring. I won't say any more than that, 'cause it's one of these things where it's like the more you talk about it, the more you spoil it. But it's got a very good art style. I actually spoke to the developers the other day. But yeah, and they're cool people. They're cool people, and they made a really great game, and everybody should check it out.
Yeah, that definitely sounded interesting.
On note, yeah, Dark Knight from 2008. Real quick, stars Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, Gary Oldman, all coming back from their same roles, with Maggie Gyllenhaal taking over as Rachel Dawes, and Aaron Eckhart and the late Heath Ledger, of course, being the two notable additions to the cast as Two-Face and Joker. Written by Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan, and David S. Goyer. Directed by Christopher Nolan and shot by Wally Pfister. So, the movie opens, of course, famously with the gang of criminals in clown masks robbing a mafia bank and killing each other off each step of the way until you see the Joker, the last one standing, and him escaping with the money. I want to pause right away to talk. I don't really know if there's anything that I can say about that opening of this movie that hasn't already been said, but I feel like it requires its own acknowledgement because it's such a, like, out of the gate villain. I don't know if reveal's not the right word, since it's not like it was a surprise that it's Joker, but your first, like, in the movie look at what has gone down as one of the most, like, beloved portrayals of the villain, beyond just comic book movies, but in general, as well as, like, the state of it being a sequel, the state of Gotham that's left off and from the end of Batman Begins, I think is immediately you kind of have a sense of what you're in for, even if you don't know what's coming, because the movie gets kind of crazy.
Yeah, I will say, like, because I was really young when this movie came out. I was like 6, so when I saw it, it wasn't. I think it may have been a bit pointy-headed for my young brain at the time. I didn't quite grab onto it as much as I did other Batman films. Despite loving Batman, I even have a Batman water bottle sitting on my desk right now with me. But going back to it, like, I haven't seen this movie in a long time because I didn't rewatch it many times. But I kind of, like, I knew how it started, but I didn't fully remember the sequence, and it was, like, despite knowing how it goes, it was very, very immediately captivating and entertaining.
Yeah, I'll get behind that. I feel like the introduction serves as a great way to introduce your villain. Not just seeing what he looks like, but also his nature. Because the whole introduction is just controlled chaos. As in, it seems like a totally crazy plan, but then all of a sudden it's working out. Like, what heist works where every single robber is backstabbing each other, or in this instance, shooting each other in the back, and yet it all works out. It serves as a great introduction as to what this Joker is about, which is chaos, but it works. And so, it's great. I love it. And that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's genuinely one of the strongest movie openings of all time. Definitely within the superhero genre. I think that you see a lot of really established sort of Nolan techniques kind of come to the forefront that really adds to the tension of it. The soundtrack, if I remember correctly, has like the ticking to it. Makes it feel like a countdown clock timing down. I reused that kind of like musical style and within Dunkirk very famously. Dunkirk always feels like a ticking clock, so it always feels like you're racing against time. And then in terms of like character moments, there's so many small but intricate details to the character of the Joker that's explained through this entertaining bank robbery without actually, giving him much in the way of like exposition to explain his motivations or his actions. You get a sense of how, despite all of the chaos of the scenario, how in control he is through these really meticulous manipulations. Like, it's one thing where, he just tells somebody to shoot the guy who breaks into the safe, like, after he's broken the safe. Like, it's one thing to say, like, oh, once that guy does the alarms, kill him. And, you're seeing the numbers of the bank robbers thin down and down and down. But there's, like, other elements within that scene. So there's the moment where the Joker and another bank robber are being shot at, and the other bank robber's like, he's out, right? And the Joker, and it's important that it is the Joker that says this, but he doesn't even say it, he nods, he's like, oh yeah, he's totally out, you should go and walk over to that man with the shotgun. And obviously the dude is not out, and you get that whole fun line of like, when did you learn to count? And it's interesting because it's a small little exchange. It's both funny, it's entertaining, but it's also an insight into like how manipulative the Joker can be, because you can tell from by the end of the plan how meticulously it was laid out in terms of what the Joker was doing, that like there is no way that character genuinely believed that gun to be out of ammo. Like, he just saw an opportunity to get that dude killed by the other dude and was like, yeah, and I'll lose, and that dude will fire his gun, and he's got one less bullet to fire at me. And then there's like the bit where he says, you were supposed to kill me at the end, right? And he's like, no, I killed the bus driver. Now that scene could play out as exactly as it does without movement, and it would still work. But what's important is you can kind of see, again, like the Joker's manipulations coming into play. He traipses around him. It's like a very subtle movement. He goes, no, I killed the bus driver, and he checks his watch. And the dude's got a gun, and he's like, bus driver? What bus driver? And if they were just still, and then the bus driver burst through the wall and killed that guy, like, that would be one thing. But the Joker, like, organizes the scene by sort of, like, sidestepping, knowing that that guy's going to keep an eye on him, and he basically places him through, movement and this kind of psychological trick of like, I know you're keeping an eye on me, so I need you to turn your back to this wall where this bus is going to plow through. And he like crafts this situation in a really like naturalistic way, and also just as a fun little nod, the mask that the Joker is wearing harkens back to a classic Batman TV series episode, and I was the first person to post about that on Reddit, just taking credit for that, because I noticed it after watching that Batman episode on an episode of ITV. I was the first person I know of to post it on Reddit anyway, because when I searched it wasn't on there already. But yeah, there's lots and lots of meticulous details within it. The plan is really interesting to see unfold, especially in the way that it's such an interesting subversion of the plan going to shit sort of trope of like bank heist movies. There's this thing, it's like a known thing within screenwriting, that if you ever see characters, and that once you know this is a thing in movies, you'll never not notice it now. If you ever see a scene where characters go, okay, this is the plan, you're going to do this, and you're going to do that, and he's going to go in there, and she's going to be on the roof, and that those things will go wrong. It's basic screenwriting. It's you have to set up the payoff. If they have the plan and the plan just goes to sequence, then there was no point in the explanation thing. And if they don't explain it, then they can just do the plan to sequence, because they can't have the plan go wrong because you don't know it's going wrong, because you don't have the context for what the plan should be. So it's just basic setup and payoff. But what you see with Nolan's opening in The Dark Knight is you see a bank robbery that in many ways on paper would be the kind of Reservoir Dogs box job where everybody's killing each other and nobody trusts each other, that other films would have as the payoff to everything going wrong. But because of the Joker as a character being so inverse with like normal expectations, like for him that is a world in which reality is correct. That is a world in which like everything is going to plan. And it's such a great sequence, and there's no sign of Batman, and immediately you just get this great, what is almost a short film in of itself. You can take that scene out of context, stripped from the context of the rest of the movie, and it's just a great little heist film about just an evil man who manipulates manipulates things, and you get so much from that character. And then it also happens to unfold into this larger Batman picture, where you've been introduced to this character and you have such a sense of identity and concept of him that he becomes this big sort of kind of terrifying, kind of unpredictable threat before he's even had an interaction with the main hero.
Yeah, and I think it's also like it's such a good way to immediately show something that's like so integral to the Joker in general, but also in this movie specifically, that he just like truly does not care about many things. He doesn't have, like you said, like his plan is for everything to be going to shit. So like it's his desire is for chaos, and we get that immediately right out of the gate in such a well-displayed manner.
Yeah, and he only ever panics once in the movie, and it's when the chaos that he planned for doesn't happen. The only time he ever panics in the entire movie is right, I'm jumping ahead, but it's right at the end when the two boats don't blow.
Yeah. Well, continuing on with Joker characterization, like one of the things that's aged well for me in this movie, and I'm in a similar boat as Jason, where like I was 10 when this came out, so a lot of it was like, all the post 9/11 America stuff was not something that was really registering, and I was just like, why is Batman not fighting people? This is dull. Obviously, thought of that has changed as I watched it as a not child, but Joker and Batman are two, like, in my opinion, the most like pliable characters in fiction, in that you can have things like already talked about, like the 60s show that works totally well, and then something like The Dark Knight. And with Joker specifically, that's a character that has been seen as, like a goofy prankster in the 60s, the Jack Nicholson version who's a gangster. You have, an anarchist Joker, a politically motivated Joker, and then you have Jokers that just like, which is my favorite, that's just kind of full of shit. One of the things that as I like got older and watched the movie more hit for me is that I do think that applies to Ledger's Joker in the extent of one of like the lines that I feel like I hear quoted all the time from like way later in the movie when he's with Dent, it's just, do I really look at the guy with the plan, when he has probably the most plan out of anybody in this movie. Everything is so meticulously crafted to, like, the buses pulling out at the end of the opening to such a degree that, and obviously it's not that there's no improv involved, but if his whole thing is chaos, but he also says he's sending a message, and I think those two things are somewhat conflicting, and I appreciate the way in which the movie kind of, again, with this opening, tells you that from the jump, because you don't necessarily sit down if this is your first time watching this movie and expect them to kill each other off one by one, and then to end with the realization that Joker was kind of in the crosshairs of this whole situation, whereas I think in past, your traditional superhero movie, your main villain's not going to be, like, in your face right away. They're not going to be in the opening scene. They're not going to put themselves in harm's way.
Well,
so
yeah,
it
that
immediately tells you anything could happen. We don't know what this guy's gonna do.
yeah, that in itself is its own subversion because if this was a Lex Luthor type of character, this would be a bunch of his goons going into a plan where he knows they're all going to die, and the evil thing that would be shown to be, the thing that would make him evil is he'd be sitting in his ivory tower on a walkie-talkie, pressing buttons and just making sure everybody gets killed. The Joker, they allude to the idea that he isn't there. All of the masked goons are sort of talking like, "Yo, what do you heard about this Joker character? The boss who sort of designed all this," and you get the impression that the Joker isn't present, which makes it even more chaotic. That he could be that guy, and that could have happened. His plan could have played out the same way with him not being there, but he just kind of wanted to be there for the craft. And just thought, "Nah, it's good banter. I'll shoot the guy in the bus. I'll get shot at," and it creates a kind of juxtaposition between him and if we go back to Batman Begins, Ra's al Ghul, who was very I guess in many ways obviously there was confrontations between Ra's al Ghul and Batman in that movie, but there was always a degree of separation between him and I guess these little ninja gangs and stuff. There's a sense of decorum and pride to him, and it's whereas the Joker is a little dog that in his own words he's chasing trucks and he wouldn't know what to do if he caught one.
I mean, and from there, the movie kind of introduces you to a new status quo in Gotham, introducing you to the new district attorney Harvey Dent, and that him, Batman, and Jim Gordon have kind of allied themselves in a hope to eliminate Gotham's organized crime. But Joker is this character that is almost the antithesis of organized crime for all of his plotting. Batman is also, as Bruce Wayne, supporting Dent and kind of hoping that Dent, as a legitimate protector, will allow him to then pursue his childhood love, Rachel Dawes, despite her being, ironically, in a relationship with said Harvey Dent. How do you guys feel about the status quo that's shown, in the state of Gotham? I personally, enjoy, one of my favorite elements is, and it's only really in the beginning, is the imposter Batman, because I think if you're going for the realism tone that Nolan goes for in this trilogy, yeah, there's going to be a bunch of idiots that put on hockey pads and carry guns and try to be Batman and don't understand the difference. But I definitely feel like it does a good job with what some franchises don't do, or some ongoing film series don't do. We're going to set something up at the end of a movie like Batman Begins with this concept of escalation, and what is going to happen now that there is this masked vigilante that's kind of an open secret that the cops are letting it happen, to what does that actually look like in the next movie?
Just on the subject of the Batman impersonators, the ones who are inspired by him, I actually think that was one of the most interesting elements of the film, and I wish they'd done more with it. The only really time you see the sort of Batman cosplayers is in that scene where he's like, "What's the difference between you and me?" And he's like, "I'm not wearing hockey pads." And then you've also got, I believe, the Joker when he's got a dude tied up as Batman. It's another cosplayer. I'm using cosplayer because I would call them vigilantes, but he's a vigilante, so it's a hard separation, which in itself is quite interesting. It's how do you differentiate between the two, because ultimately there kind of is no difference except one of them's got money and doesn't use a gun. But yeah, I love that concept because it's one that engages wholly with the politics of Batman. And I think when you ask him questions about the status quo of Gotham within this film, it's difficult to engage with Batman in isolation within the context of this film, because it's a film that is in conversation with the difficult ramifications of what Batman is throughout its runtime. And sometimes the answers that it comes to aren't always really well explored or satisfying, and sometimes there's some stuff like really interestingly. But I think it's the fact that Batman is this kind of like superhero. It's always like a funny one when you call him a superhero, because especially in grounded movies like these, is he a superhero? Is he even a hero? But like Batman exists ideologically within his worldview to rid Gotham of crime, clean up the streets and all that. And you just never see any sign of that being the result of Batman's presence. Like, especially in Nolan's world, like, there is no point where they go, oh, but crime's down. Like, it's doing well. Like, we got rid of all that crime. This Joker guy's here, but before that Joker guy was here, all of the mobsters, they're just at home, eating soup. Like, they're just not bothering. Like, you never get anything like that. And so it's interesting that it has that discussion with these points. Harvey Dent kind of has the argument with, like, Batman being bad for the world. Oh, no, is Harvey Dent the one to think? Yeah, Harvey Dent's, like, positive about the world of Batman, and it's actually Bruce Wayne who's like, oh, he's a vigilante, and because of that kind of, he can't be the guy who's, like, praising him when it is him. So these conversations exist, and you sort of see like the ramifications of like what Batman would imply in a world with the imposter Batman. Something that I thought was explored a lot better in Robert Pattinson's Batman movie, with like the Riddler essentially being like a radicalized 4chaner who just sort of idolized him. So I've gone on such a massive tangent here. I'm not even sure what the original question was, but I just really like the Batman imposters.
I completely agree that I think, like you said, I think they should have been explored a lot more, because, the two main points where they're used in that first scene and then when Joker kidnaps one, it's very, to me, compelling, because it's a very, very real thing. All the time you hear about, copycat crimes in the news. I mean, at least I have heard many stories of that, so it's like, it's not in any way far-fetched. It's very real to imagine that is something that could happen. So it just makes for such a compelling story that I wish they had dove into.
Take out the Hong Kong stuff, put in more exploration of the copycats.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, yeah, I think that's fair, because one, I think, would add a lot more depth to the story versus not much. I don't think the Hong Kong stuff added much, in my opinion. It was fine. Like, it didn't take away from the film, but it just didn't add much either, I feel. Drags, for sure.
One of the things I do like talking specifically about, like, the status quo of Gotham, I think one of the things that it really does for me, and this is kind of comparing it more to, like, the Burton films in a way, like, with the Burton films, you feel Gotham itself is, like, a character, or it's a part of, like, this mythos that we have, and of course Gotham is, when you really dive into it, but, like, with the one thing that I didn't like about Batman Begins is that we really don't get an idea of, like, what Gotham is like, and this kind of delves a lot more into the politics of Gotham, and getting to see a lot more of, like, the ramifications of everything that happened in the first one. So I really think that I like that it builds upon it, and I like that it kind of gives Gotham a character that isn't just, like, obviously looking at the architecture and everything, it isn't like I'm watching Burton's films, but I am just looking at really Chicago in the end. But it's interesting to see the inner workings of Gotham this time around, and to really get a deep dive into it, and, like, not only do we get just Gotham as a city, but we also get to see the civilians in it, especially when we get to the boat scene later on. But I like that we kind of get a lot more of Gotham in this, and to see, like, what is Gotham really like as a whole.
I think the point Sean is trying to make is that if you want to get, like, a shot of a downtrodden city without any special effects, just go to Chicago.
Damn.
understand.
I agree with all of you because the thing about Batman is that Gotham is always a character in all of the Batman movies and shows included. But we never really get to see like the people itself. They're more of like a characterization of the city itself, and they're more like seen as like a cohesive whole rather than individuals. This is like the first time we're actually seeing individuals in Gotham make actions for themselves, and it makes the Christopher Nolan movie be more realistic. Wow, what a great statement I made there. But it's just a lot of untouched potential that we don't really get to see explored. A show would be great, but knowing WB, they'll probably ruin it. So, you know what? I would rather just have it as is. And
We get to where he
just
fucks
let my-
Zaslav.
What?
Fuck David Zaslav.
Yes. Fuck that.
Every time I hear his name, I just think of...
I just have to say that every time we...
I'm sorry. Every single time I hear David... What's his last name? Zaslav? Every time I hear his last name, or hear his name, I think of Victor Zaz, and that's all I can think of. And I'm sorry, but that's just the mental image I have when people talk about him. That I have a mental image of Victor Zaz being a head of WB, or whatever it is that David Zaslav is. That's all, though.
Civilization of Gotham is one of my two kind of beefs with this movie, in that I don't love the Chicago look, as someone mentioned. And it looked like a quote-unquote like real city in Begins too, but at least had that like rail system in it that made it feel like it just slightly elevated into like the idea of that's something that's a robust rail system is something that just doesn't exist in the United States. So
That's true.
that alone made it feel like it was not quite reality. Whereas this as a city, and it goes beyond just the city itself. There's no Batcave. They just have that like cold white light, like flat area that where you can hang out. And I'm not a fan of that either.
I totally agree.
Whereas you can't even like see the logo on it. I'm all for the realism and the like unique style that Nolan brought from himself onto this, because more of these. One of the reasons I love comic books is because they're such a collaborative medium, and so many different people with so many different voices have worked on the same characters. So I wish the movies did that more instead of being so mass-produced, which is why the Dark Knight trilogy stands out so much. But in this one instance, it's a little bit too much of one thing for me.
Yeah, I understand the push for realism, but for me, I really wish, especially with Batman, that within superhero movies we could. I know it's a common complaint, like, and it's that weird one because of the it's people are like, oh, make it more superhero-y, and then they get that, and they're like, no, not like that, and people are making it less superhero-y, no, not like that, and it's such a like. So many people have so many opinions on this stuff because there's so much of a love for the source material, and even the source material that everybody is pulling from to make their opinions on these movies is different source material. One person's childhood Batman comics are completely different than the next person's childhood Batman comics. But I do think we have lost something within superhero movies, and it's very obvious in Batman because this was also a problem in The Batman as well. The issue I have with Gotham in this is that, like you say, like Gotham should be its own character, and the best portrayals in visual format, in moving visual format for me, with Gotham, is the Tim Burton stuff, because it has. Well, Tim Burton is, he's a student of expressionist cinema, Cabinet Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, that kind of thing. So you get these really angular buildings, like stylized, sort of curvature that doesn't make sense, architecture that doesn't really have a basis in the real world. And like nobody went into Batman 1989 or Batman Returns and was like, oh, that movie was really great, but weren't the doors and windows on all the buildings weird? And that really took me out of it. Like, nobody cares about that stuff. It's cool, and it's interesting, and it's visually compelling. And then you've got, on a completely different style, but still feeling very much like Gotham, Batman the Animated Series goes for a whole Art Deco vibe. And both of those things bring so much to the character of Gotham, but also tell us a lot about that world. It's not just a visual style. Tim Burton's world feels cold and intimidating, and the buildings are tall and loom over you, and everything feels sharp and jagged and like dangerous. And then the Batman the Animated Series world, with all of its Art Deco flair, it creates this kind of almost Gatsby-esque divide between like the poor of the city. So you get all these, there's lots of shots of like robbers in flat caps in back alleys with guns, and it's just a back alley. And then there'll be all these like dinners Bruce Wayne's going to, and there's these gorgeous golden trims on the doors and stuff, and it creates that sort of class divide that should really be an element of Batman and Gotham that is explored a lot more than it is, and it does all this without doing anything other than providing art. Like, the Gotham of the Burton films and the Gotham of the animated series, it's all just artistic choices, like visual set design and the way things are drawn, and yet we get so much about why that world and all of its strangeness would create something like Batman. And then you look at the Gotham of the most of the Batman stuff, and it's like, oh, that's just a city. Like, it might be a pretty grungy city, it might be a pretty rough city, but it's just a city. It's like, it's straight up just a city. And like, although I understand the push for realism and Nolan's trilogy definitely like skews towards realism and kind of grounds everything, it does sort of rob the world of some of its sense of, in a way, it robs it of some of its sense of reality, because like, I look at the Gotham of the Dark Knight and I'm like, would this Gotham have supervillains? Would this world have a character like Scarecrow and the Joker and Batman? And I always kind of think probably not. I know they're more grounded takes on the character, and that's how they kind of like that's how they kind of like bridge the gap between those two contradicting things. But it is odd to sort of think of like, release Chicago just having a super villain like the Joker who's going around in clown makeup and robbing banks, but like that character totally fits in the expressionist cinema of Burton's works.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the animated series as well, because I was gonna bring that up, because to me that's a big part of my reference point to Gotham City and Batman in general, because I grew up watching that a lot and loving it. Still love it to this day, of course, because it's brilliant. And to me, it's like that's such a quintessential Gotham. Like, it's such a character. It is so like beautifully drawn, and like every single part of it, from the alleys to the skyscrapers, just looks like it should be Gotham, and it's just right to me. And that's the only way I know how to explain it. But it's like, it really gives credence, I feel, to the expression a picture's worth 1,000 words, because it's like every time I watch that show, it's like there's so many little shots that I'm like, I can just imagine describing that in all of its depth and detail and so forth.
I feel like that's why the first movie has a better art style than this one. As much as I like The Dark Knight better than The Dark Knight Begins.
Batman Begins.
Like, what, did I say it correctly?
Batman Begins.
Oh shit!
Not Dark Knight Begins.
Figure that out. Anyway, Batman Begins.
When have we ever censored?
Oh yeah, that's true! Haha! Anyway,
We've been doing this for a year.
that's why I feel like I don't listen to the podcast. This is what I feel like the Batman Begins has over the Dark Knight, is that the brownish like tinge that it emits from that movie, it just makes it super, I don't know, like, what's the correct term for this? Like, musty. Is that a correct term?
I was gonna say this is a colder color palette.
It is a very colder. It's like very, very blue, while the Batman Begins is very brown. But it makes it feel unsafe, right? It makes it feel dirty.
Yeah,
And-
it becomes a surrealist town because it's a town
Exactly.
trapped in sunset.
Exactly.
And
It makes
that
it make it
gives
much more
a
colorful.
different feel.
Exactly. The first movie, it felt like a downtrodden city that would basically breed villains like Scarecrow, right? And then that would eventually make someone like the Batman, someone who really like, needs to stand up to all these injustices that is going on in the city. Because the city, it just reflects. It's like the current reflection of like what's going on. It's downtrodden. It's dirty. It's unsafe, right? And so it would make sense for a superhero, or quote unquote superhero, for like someone like Batman to show up and basically attempt to clean the city. And then that's kind of lost in translation with the sequel, with The Dark Knight. And it's because it's not, as Dan said, it doesn't seem like that dangerous. It just seems like a city, right? And
I think oh, sorry.
I lost it. Just
All right. For Dan, the one who's new to us, I have a horrible habit of cutting Matt off when I think he's done, and then Matt immediately losing his train of thought. I think I gotta buy Matt dinner sometimes just for that. But I was just gonna say, I think the best, on a more positive note, example of kind of showing the balance between oh man, now I'm losing my own train of thought. But of the realism versus like the two different kinds of Gotham is actually for me in Bale's performance. I think of the three, for what I recall, this is probably my favorite performance he puts out of the trilogy, because I actually do feel there like it's almost like he's so cartoonishly playboy billionaire. The couple of times you get to see him, like when he strolls in with the ballerina and it's, oh, you're Batman, what a loon. That feels a little bit more played up in a way that is kind of a caricature of what you like think of a billionaire. And like eat the rich and all that, don't get me wrong, but like I don't. But it's not exactly like they're trying to portray him in a way where he's wildly unappealing, I would say. Like there's not even a little bit of humanization. Whereas even something like Blackberry that came out this year, and Glenn Howerton, who is like an absolute shitbag in that movie with the character he plays as this like rich guy, but there's still like little elements where you kind of like see him as a person versus like the Bruce Wayne persona is just rich.
Yeah, he's just a bit of a prick.
So I think that's the only time you have something that feels that way, and that is a highlight for me. I can't remember. Somebody said something earlier that made me think of that, and then I lost half of my point along the way.
I mean, just to add on to your point, I do think it's interesting that I feel like character-wise, the idea that Bruce Wayne becomes a literal caricature in this entry, like to the point that it's like an exaggerated parody of what a rich billionaire playboy would be like. There's even the bit where he saves that dude who's going to out him with his car, and he's in a brutal crash, and Jim Gordon's like, "Oh, you did a heroic thing there," and he's like, "I was just trying to speed past the stoplight." And it's like he puts on such a persona of billionaire playboy that he loses any semblance of a real personality, which would be a criticism, but I think it's interesting with a character like Batman, because the whole thing with Batman is that he's constantly battling this dual identity in which one is he more. There's lots of speeches from the comics where he's like, Bruce Wayne died in that alley. Like, that person's gone. Batman is who I am. There's a very famous panel of Wonder Woman using the lasso of truth, and she's like, holds this thing, and she's like, I'm Diana. And Superman's like, I'm Clark Kent. Batman's like, I'm Batman, because that's who he is. He's not Bruce Wayne, he's Batman. And so I think this idea of like giving Bruce Wayne the personality in this one where he is literally without personality but then giving Batman lots of character development and lots of like engaging thoughts and ideology and lines. And I think it speaks more to the psychology of that character. And just to go back to the colour palettes for one bit, while I do agree with Matt that the colour palette for this one is a lot duller, what I do like about it, to be positive on it for a bit, is, and this is a hot take I'm dropping here. If you look at the colour palettes of 1, 2, and 3 of this trilogy, the entire colour palette, I'm not saying it was intentional, but this is absolutely how I'm reading it, is one Dark Knight. Batman Begins starts with, his parents get killed. From that point onwards, we go into the Dark Knight. It's all sunset colours. It's all moody street lamps at the end of the day, just as everybody's going down to bed. And then we get to the second film, and it's cold, and it's dark, and it's just clinically cold in a way that the pitch black of night is. And then we get to the third film, and by the end of it, we rise into sun. And the third film is literally called The Dark Knight Rises, which can be, in this sort of reading of it, a double entendre, because it's the Dark Knight of Batman Rises, but also the Dark Knight, the physical Dark Knight, has risen, it is lifted, and Bruce Wayne can be in this sunny little restaurant at the end of it. And I like that.
Yeah, I've never thought about that, but that does make a lot of sense looking back on it.
When you get to The Dark Knight Rises as well, which is a film that I don't enjoy, to be fair, but it is, it still has things. When you get to The Dark Knight Rises as well, it's still a cold colour palette, but it's brighter, and then by the end of the film it's warmer. It's brighter and warmer than The Dark Knight, even though it chooses a very sort of neutral colour palette rather than like the more stylized bronzy musk of the first film. I can say a lot about Dark Knight Rises. I don't like the film, but I can say a lot about it.
See, I do like that film.
No, right now, I don't like it either. Our anger combined might explode the entire family.
Well, and then you would have Jake and I on the other end of the spectrum who like that movie.
Matt and I in general find ourselves on different. I have staked my claim on this podcast before as the world's foremost Joel Schumacher Batman defender. First of all,
Joel Schumacher Batman great. I don't care what.
Absolutely. This is why I knew I liked Dan. I knew I liked him.
So the Dark Knight Rises defender, and then probably my most disagreed with opinion is I am an Amazing Spider-Man 2 defender. I don't want to get into any of that, so talk about it later.
Oh my god.
My guy.
He is getting points left and right.
Fucking Globe that likes Amazing Spider-Man 2, but
I love that movie.
I do. Like, don't get us wrong, it's not my favorite superhero movie by any means, but when I first saw that, I really, really enjoyed it. Came out, thought, okay, yeah, they've done a good one, people will be happy with this. And then I was baffled by the response to it. Like, people fucking hated that movie, and I just did not get it.
Yeah.
Like, people complained about the tonal whiplash of the, like, final
I
act,
love
and I'm like, I love how sudden the tonal whiplash is, because, like, that to me is fucking Spider-Man. That is, his day is trying to get photos and not flunk science class, and then, the next thing he knows, he's holding a dead relative in his arms because somebody's, the Green Goblin's fucking murdered his aunt or some shit. Like, it's Spider-Man is the life of tonal whiplashes.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really like Spider-Man 2. There's nothing else I can add to that. I see some of the complaints that people say. I see some of the complaints that people put out. And I get where they're coming from on some of them. Some of them I think are just not valid at all. I don't know. I like it. I did not get the backlash at all. I have a friend actually who doesn't do YouTube anymore. But like Liberty, I like see him like every day. He had a YouTube channel called Film Rant, and he very briefly did a series where he called like Film Defender, where he'd take like a film that was like critically reviled and talk about why it was actually good. And Amazing Spider-Man 2 was one of the films he covered, and he's like, this film's great. I don't know why. And I was like, yeah, it is. You're not wrong. I like it, and I know that sort of to some people will relinquish my serious film industry person and writer and filmmaker a critic analysis card, but I don't care. It's good. Enjoy it.
If you like it, it's good.
Yeah. I mean, I don't believe in guilty pleasures personally.
Exactly.
Like, but sort of. Not to. If anyone has more to say, don't let me stop you. But I don't know how much longer we got, Dan, for, given that you were in a much later time than us.
Yeah, quarter past midnight for me right now.
Yeah, but before we end anything, before we wrap up, I think we've barely talked about Dent, as well as about, like, the general idea of this movie, being kind of, like, touching on, and I don't know how you can relate to this, how things are in, like, the UK and the impact there, but the movie feels kind of distinctly, American, strangely, because the way it talks about, I think, security, with the Patriot Act post 9/11 and a lot of the security theater you'll see at airports, that a lot of studies have shown doesn't really do anything, and in the way that the politics of Gotham take away from, insist certain things are being done to keep the people of Gotham safe, kind of returning back to what Dan said way earlier about, like, but there's no real evidence of something like Batman actually doing that, and I'm not one who, I don't really like the, in my opinion, lazy take of, like, oh, if Batman wanted to fight crime, he would give to social causes, just because, like, man, that's not the point, but,
yeah, totally. It's like, that is true in reality, like, if this was a real person, but this is fiction, and that is not interesting to engage with.
Yeah.
The psychologically tortured weirdo is a far more interesting narrative concept than the generous billionaire. But yes, absolutely, yeah, you donate to social causes, but this is a story.
Right, and that's watching a movie about Bruce Wayne figuring out his expenses and what he's gonna divert where and give to who to support what. That's not something that anyone wants to watch.
And also, that's not Batman.
That's fair enough.
And for what it's worth, in the comics, it is very, very, very well established that Bruce Wayne does in fact give a large portion to social causes, but, like, affordable housing doesn't necessarily fix, like, tear gas.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, is those aren't mutually exclusive things, and one of them is a good story to tell, so let's focus on the one that's a good story.
One of the things I wanted to get at, though, is Harvey Dent, because that is one of the things that loses me a little bit in the movie as well. I think Aaron Eckhart is, like, fantastic in the role. I think all the performances across the board are very good. There's not a weak one in the bunch for me. But I kind of wish, I do feel that the character becomes a little redundant as this, like, the face of the... These movies are really about, like, the symbol of Batman, and then Dent as the symbol of, like, the Gotham's White Knight. And I think he becomes a little redundant when they introduce Rachel Dawes, who was an original character to these movies, because she's already fighting the good fight in the light of day. And I think the movie makes the mistake of kind of... I go back and put... Are you guys familiar with, I'll explain it anyway in case anyone listening isn't, but the term fridging?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, well, anyone who doesn't, it's coined by Gil, the Green Lantern. Oh, yeah, my understanding of it, at least, was that I heard it, I believe it was coined by Gail Simone, the legendary comic book writer, there is a Green Lantern comic book where Green Lantern's girlfriend is chopped up and put in a refrigerator, and they spend if they could spend negative time on how it impacted the woman, they would have. And that is unfortunately a trend across a lot of media, including comic books, of killing or severely harming a woman for male pain. And I do think this movie does at least spend time with Rachel on what she is going through before she dies, when the Joker kills her and Two-Face turns into Two-Face. But I also feel like it does become... Introducing Dent in one movie and then kind of speeding through it, it makes some of the Dent Two-Face stuff feel a little bit undercooked for me, and it also makes me be like, well, what about, like, him as this face of, like, fighting through within the system, which is, like, I don't want to get into it for hours talking about whether or not that's effective, but as that face when Rachel already exists in the movie just to kill her off and then have Dent be, though we have to hide what Dent really did, Like, why couldn't we prop Rachel up? Why did you have to? And I don't mean this in like, oh, it's a plot hole way, because I think that's dumb. But I just think thematically, you kind of shoot a really strong character.
So I don't agree with I agree with you on the like origin of Rachel. Like, she exists as a character primarily to make Batman and Harvey Dent feel sad, and she's a good character up until that point, and then it's like, oh, she is a plot point for the men. I just want to state, by the way, because I feel like we've been very critical of the film throughout. Like, the film's amazing.
Brilliant. Absolutely, like, phenomenal.
Since we're talking about it, it gets a little bit deeper, and there is things to pull with it, but like, yeah, the film's fucking amazing. So please, this is me being high and smarter than Christopher Nolan. Nice, incredible movie. But there are, you know,
The criticisms we're finding are pretty minor, to be fair.
just weird. I just realised it was weird that we'll talk more about the criticisms than the praise and things. To be talking about it, but I just think the criticisms are more interesting than the praise on this one, because the praise is kind of universal, actually, and like everybody knows what's good about it. But the things that are maybe a bit go unnoticed and like are more can pick apart is like where it doesn't work a little bit. So yeah, the origin of Rachel isn't great. I do understand Harvey is a symbol, because like you say, the film is about symbols, so it's not necessarily about like, oh well, we'll just prop up this woman and then she can be that role. It has to be, you know, the smiling blonde district attorney who, you know, has all these models, has all these slogans, and has the people behind him, because he has to represent that. In much the same way as by the end of the film, Batman has to represent the thing that, you know, killed him, so that he can be pure, and like he represents the evil, and it gives people things to root for. The problem I have with the film primarily is you are correct in stating it is a very, very American film. And coming at it from a British perspective, that American feeling is kind of makes for some dodgy politics from my perspective. So the post 9/11 stuff is, you know, prominent throughout the whole film. One of the biggest things for me is like the kind of like navigating the idea of a surveillance state. The way he catches the Joker is with the hacking into all of the citizens' government's private phones and making them this like sonar camera where you can basically see what everybody's doing at every point. And you know, they do engage with the fact of like, holy shit, this is very unethical. With Lucius Fox being like, I don't know about this one, Bruce. This is not something I want to be a part of. And he's like, it's the only way to catch the Joker. And what bothers me about that is like they pay the lip service of critiquing it as, yeah, this is problematic and this is a bad thing. But then ultimately that is what saves the day. And I'm just like,
It's a bit of a mixed signal.
yeah, it just feels like, you know, like when you watch like 24 and it's just like, it feels like it's an engaging series, but it just feels like America really trying to justify like Guantanamo Bay. Like, no, we have to torture them. Like, the only way to save the world is to torture this guy. Like, it has to happen. Sorry, it's just because we want to save the world. And they kind of do that with The Dark Knight. And yes, he does destroy the surveillance system afterwards, but that almost makes it worse.
Oh, that's way
That
worse.
makes it a bit too peachy and a bit too tied in a bow and a bit too neat. Like, oh well, don't worry, guys. Like, if we create a surveillance state, we'll just use it to catch the bad guys, and then when we caught the bad guys, we'll get rid of it. And obviously, it's, you know, it doesn't apply to reality 1-to-1, because that's it's, you know, with, as far as I'm aware, we haven't hacked everybody's phones so we can detect them with this weird sonar vision. But the sentiment is that it was a necessary evil, because it is the thing that saves the day. And then Batman's just like, but I'm a good guy, so I'll just get rid of it. And it's just a bit too clean cut for us. Like, I don't mind it having politics I disagree with necessarily, in the sense of like, it can be the thing that saves the day, but at least keep that weird thing around to you know, if you're gonna engage with the discomfort of it existing, if you're gonna show Lethal Cross's resistance to it, then make the audience sit with that discomfort. Yeah, of course, the Joker, but now this horrible bit of tech that just like monitors your every fiber of your being just exists, and just one person who is very rich has all of that power to do what they want with it. And yeah, we, as an audience, we trust Bruce Wayne and Batman to do the right thing, but like, what if, you know, an enemy gets a hold of it? What if somebody dangerous gets a hold of it? What if it's like, what if Batman has a fucking bad day and he's just like, I'm just gonna spy on these people and ruin their lives for some reason? Like, it's such a like weird thing to have temporarily. Like, it feels like I'm going to draw a weird parallel here, but you know how like AI is like a big thing now, like generative AI, and it's causing loads of like misinformation on the internet because we didn't have enough of that, and it's like causing loads of problems with like deep fake porn and like non-consensual nudes and just a shitload of awful stuff. Just people using it for like, it's already like generative AI is, you know, even morally based on the fact like it's stealing a lot of work from a database that wasn't used with this permission, and there's a whole like moral implication there. But like, that exists in the world now. That is a real world example of dangerous, problematic tech that in theory could be used for good, but we are seeing that it is not being used for so much good all that often. That isn't something you can put back in the box. Now that it's out there, it's fucking out there. Like, once it exists, it exists. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And like, the idea of Batman and the Dark Knight engaging with this kind of post 9/11 surveillance state, and sort of speaking to that metaphor through this advanced computer system that can see the whole of Gotham, and actually engaging with the idea of like, this is questionable and should we be doing this, to then sort of neatly go, it's alright, we just smashed it up at the end. It's like, that feels like you kind of took the coward's way out on your own themes there. Like, you wanted to talk about these things, but not too deep. Let's not get too much into it. And yeah, that always just sat a bit weird with me, especially for a film that's so keen to delve into like morally grey and complex issues. Like, it's a very, very bold ending for them to make Harvey Dent a villain who was going to murder a child, and then decide like, actually, we shouldn't tell people about that child killing business because then they might not like this guy. And that's like for a blockbuster. I'm not even saying like that, you know, I think politically it's a good ending, and that symbol should be upheld, and it's a complex decision that should have been made that way, and if it was real, like, that's how I would want it to go. But like, for a blockbuster, that is bold. That is genuinely brave. Like, it is, generally speaking, blockbusters throughout Western history. And I say Western history because in Korea it's the fucking opposite. They love a satin. It's really wild. I've got a super interesting anecdote about Korean cinema. But yeah, the Western audiences love a happy ending. Like, doesn't matter how dark the film is, doesn't matter how grim it is. Like, unless it's a horror, happy ending. Happy ending all the way through. Like, it's got to be a happy ending. And then for like Dark Knight to be like, oh yeah, the hero's on the run, and the other hero kind of got corrupted. We're going to pretend he didn't get corrupted, and sort of sit in this uncomfortable lie. That's wild. That's genuinely wild, and I think it's and for a film that's like willing to have that, to just tie up the computer stuff is kind of doesn't sit right with this, especially since it's genuinely like just not a thing in the Dark Knight. You know, they're just like, yeah, nope, we destroyed it.
Plus, it's important to note that the Patriot Act has kept nobody safe. Warrantless search and seizure has never really helped anyone. So it's not even like it's effective. It's just evil.
But in this narrative, it's not the joke.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
You're right. In Batman, it's it saved the fucking world, guys. So how about that? Get a taste of that.
Want to move on to kind of just wrap up thoughts here, or does anyone have anything else to say? I'm trying to beat my habits of cutting people off.
I think one of the things that I know, I don't like the fridging and treatment of like Rachel in this, but if there's one thing I do genuinely love, it's the scene for when like Harvey specifically realizes that like when Batman shows up to save him, that like the anguish in the idea of him like having, I'm the one they saved and not the one, that was such a good scene. At the very least, it was such a heartfelt like moment to see, and at the very least, I loved the portrayal, and just seeing the agony of it afterwards. I do like that. That is to say, not to like take away from it, like it was still fridging, but like I do genuinely love. I loved the reaction. I loved how it like turned out and how it's so. It's such a genuine like way of doing like the whole railroad situation of like which track do you choose kind of thing, and I really did like at least how they did it. Maybe not like the context of it, but yeah, I know one of the other things that I also didn't get to mention. I kind of mentioned this the last time too, is that I'm not a big fan of Nolan as a director when it comes to certain things. This is one of the few movies where I genuinely do love the way that he directs things. It wasn't until Interstellar that I was, or not Interstellar, Inception, that I was kind of more towards the questionable feelings because of his way of, in certain situations, lifting scenes from other things and saying that they're homages, and like just the idea of sometimes where there's a difference between homage and where's the line drawn between like something like The Lion King where they take scenes from other things and then draw over them to make a new scene, or versus this where you're taking, say, I one of the more famous examples is like him taking from Satoshi Kon and using that from things with Paprika to make Inception, where you see a lot of those inspirations, and it's that inspiration versus genuine. Where do you draw the line of inspiration and plagiarism? To some idea, I do like to at least touch on that, because I don't. This is one of the few things where like I do like Nolan as a director overall. This is one of the things where I genuinely enjoy his artistic style and like the way that he portrays a lot of the realism in this film. I just this is before this back when this came out, I was younger and didn't really have an idea when it came to creators, so it's like interesting to go back to this and to see like having now had more of a library to look at when it comes to Nolan, when it comes to like seeing Oppenheimer and things like Inception, and to go back to this and see like the idea, like how the themes have changed over time, especially with this when you have like when you have differences between like Oppenheimer and this, where you see things like them upholding the symbols and what they do with Harvey in this one versus like Oppenheimer. It's essentially like it is in a way of like we let the cat out of the bag kind of situation. Like we can't come back from this, and then in this they don't really. It feels like Oppenheimer explores those feelings more. I'm going on a ramble that makes no sense. But like it's interesting to go back through Nolan's filmography, and especially with this, since we went through Batman Begins and then this, to just see how things have evolved over time.
I don't want to harp on the least favorites, because as we kind of laughed about earlier, we spent a lot of time talking about the negatives of such a great movie. Like for me, just some of the metaphors with Harvey and with their surveillance don't fall fully into place. But overall, I mean, it's a masterful movie. It is something that feels like a wonderful follow-up to Batman Begins, in that it yes and its predecessor, and not every sequel does that, and it really shows how things have changed in Gotham since the introduction of Batman. All of the performances are wonderful. Ledger, Bale, Eckert, Kane, everyone, Maggie Gyllenhaal, they're wonderful. But for me, like, the ultimate highlight is just the unpredictable nature of the movie right from the jump, as we spent a lot of time talking about, not knowing what to expect out of the opening heist, all the way leading to the reveal of the Joker's with the heist. But throughout the whole movie, I've seen it multiple times at this point, and I watched it to, like, refresh my memory, because it's been a while, before this podcast, before recording, and I still found, like, Joker's whole plot is somehow both kind of nonsensical, and that he's definitely, in my opinion, full of shit, and the, like, confliction between, like, some men will watch the world burn, as Alfred says, and also it's about sending a message, like, which one is it? But I like that, and I think the unpredictable nature of it is, like, as I was saying, I rewatched it, and I was still, like, forgetting steps of everything that happened, and everything that had to just go so right, but also not feeling in a ludicrous manner, because there's definitely some improv there, and it's the right amount of, like, unhinged for a character like the Joker at that level of characterization. So just for me, the highlight is the fact that I've watched this movie I don't know how many times now, and I still find myself being like, oh, right, like, I totally forgot about that, and that's an element of it, and it maintains that unpredictable nature. And yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend it. I think you'd be probably hard-pressed to find anyone that doesn't recommend The Dark Knight. I know my mom hates it.
I was just about to say that. I was about to say our mom does not like... Our mom left the theater.
Mom hates it. But, yeah, I mean, that's... It's really fucking good, and I don't... It's good.
Agreed. I don't even... It's hard to pick out, like, a least favorite thing, because it's... Like we were saying, like, the criticisms we were pointing out aren't even, like, massive flaws to the film, necessarily, but, I guess just overall I think that Rachel deserved a better conclusion to her character arc than she got, and that's a little bit frustrating. That's probably the lowest point for me. And alternatively to what Jake was saying earlier, I actually thought Two-Face was the most compelling part of the movie, and my favorite part. I thought Aaron Eckhart, from the moment he came on screen, was very, very charismatic, which to me was important because that makes the transition into his madness all the more jarring and all the more impactful. So I thought he did a phenomenal job throughout the whole film, playing Harvey Dent, playing Two-Face, because it's really two characters in some sense. So, and yeah, obviously I would recommend this movie, like Jake said.
Unsurprisingly, I would recommend this movie as well. This movie is very well shot, the effects are beautiful, the cinematography is beautiful, the battle choreography is beautiful. Honestly, there's very few flaws with this movie. I know we just spent like an hour and a half going over those flaws, so it doesn't really seem like we had that opinion. But I assure you, it is. It's just that, talking about the positives is like, I don't know, it's like eating ramen noodles for like 150th time while you were in college. You're sick of it, right? You don't want to do it anymore. You want something new. So yeah, I recommend it for all the reasons I stated before. The really only criticism I have is the color palette, because I feel like, as we mentioned before, and as Dan brought it up and made a really good point about, is that this doesn't really fit these characters. These characters feel like they should be in a different place, because these characters don't fit in a real world. But other than that, the movie's great. I recommend it. Yep, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously recommend it too. I don't think we got to say enough positive, but again, like, what can you do? I think, like, my least favorite part, I know we didn't get into this as much, to me, if anything, it was the choreography when it came to fight scenes. I don't know about anybody's opinions on that, but it has always felt fairly dull to me. There's nothing, like, it's nothing too bad. It's nothing, like, again, it's, like, such a small gripe to me, in my opinion.
Nolan doesn't know how to shoot fight scenes.
Yeah.
He's a king in so many aspects of cinema, but for some reason, he just doesn't know how to shoot fight scenes. Like, Batman Begins, the fight scenes in that are just humble of
Oh,
Yeah.
It's a little bit better in Dark Knight, but he doesn't do fight scenes. He does set pieces. He knows how to shoot the action of a set piece, like a big, like Dark Knight Rises, the opening plane sequence is like one of the best parts of that film. And the bank heist is an incredible set piece, and there's so much scale and scope. But the second you break it down to like two characters punching each other, yeah, he just doesn't know what to do.
If anything, like my favorite part is the hospital scene, which I know we didn't get to talk about much on, but like honestly, I love that, especially the ending when like you have Heath Ledger coming out and like it stops, the explosion stopped midway because the bombs wouldn't go off during the actual filming of the shoot, and then afterwards it's just him improvisationally acting towards the just seeing that scene. Knowing the context behind it just makes it feel so much better to me, in my opinion.
Hate to be the dude that is the one who's like, actually, Santa Claus doesn't exist, but that's
Was that not true?
That's not true. No.
Wait,
If it
Santa
was,
doesn't exist?
if it was true, somebody on pyrotechnics would be very, very much in trouble. You don't want to do a film with pyrotechnics of that scale and not know when the explosions are going off, and the mistake would be too great. Because he's walking out the hospital at the time, like that's it. Yeah. I'm confident that is not true. I think I've also read that it's not true. Maybe double check it. Maybe I'm being a horrible jaded cynic, and actually Santa Claus is out there. But yeah, I don't think the improv thing is true. The clapping though, when he claps in the prison, that was it.
Great scene either way.
Yeah.
Great scene either way. I'm looking at it now, and it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things about it being a myth, that it was planned all along. I wonder how that started. Then that's some older information that somehow got out.
There's loads and loads of film misinformation out there. You know, the very, very famous one of like, oh, they didn't know what was going to happen when the chest burst that came out from Alien, and that's why they're so surprised. Yeah, that's not true.
Yeah.
It's just not true.
There's also, I've read a lot of things about things that were like improvised the first take and then they put it in, and so like people say that all their reactions are real, but it's like, no, their reactions are acting. It was real the first take. I don't know. That's something I've read about. That doesn't matter much.
And cap us off.
I'll keep mine sweet and brief and the most generic, basic bitch answer you're gonna get. Least favorite part, Hong Kong. Best part, Joker. Would I recommend? Absolutely.
On that note, well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Please plug again, where can everyone find you, and where should they be looking for all the stuff you talked about earlier that's going to be coming in the future?
This is the first time you're saying that, and I'm responding to it in a very nice
Yeah!
not disorganized manner.
Just like the alien scene.
Yeah, I'm responding to it super organically, and my internet didn't clunk out there because I'm on a hotspot. Dan Drambles on all social media. You'll find us on Twitter. I refuse to call it X because it's not. It's Twitter. Dan Drambles on Twitter. Dan Drambles on Instagram. I believe Dan_Drambles on Instagram, or maybe the other way around. I'm not sure, but if you search Dan Drambles, you probably can find us. And most importantly, Dan Drambles on YouTube, which is where my stuff is. Twitter, I just tweet about games I'm excited about. It's not that engaging, but YouTube, that's where the real gem is. And please, look into Terabytes. We have a trailer. If you go to our website, creatorvc.com, lots of people don't get my accent on that one, so I'm going to spell it out. CREATORVC. Not BC, not GC. Everybody mistakes this. Thick Geordie accent. VC, like virtual chat. CreatorVC.com, and if you go down to projects, you can find Terabytes there. You'll see the trailer, you'll see a synopsis. We also have a survey. I would highly, highly, highly recommend everybody fill out that survey. I know it doesn't sound particularly exciting, but we do these documentaries on this huge scope, and your answers to that survey, we genuinely read every single survey response, and your answers to that survey can genuinely shape the film. Like, I'm not just saying that this is kind of like our whole modus operandi. We are community-powered entertainment. We have our own ideas of what we want to bring to the film, but we are just a small team exploring this big, huge part of culture, and, you know, our knowledge is going to be limited in some places. We're going to have some blind spots. We want to know what you want to see in it. We want to know what topics you want covered. We want to know who you want to be in it, who you want to hear from. And when we get those names and those suggestions, we look into all of them, and we get people in the film based on what people ask for. Games will feature based on your requests. People will feature based on your requests. We'll have our own sort of foundational structure that we'll build around. You know, we're not just sort of winging it on everybody else's suggestions, but genuinely you can have a real impact on the series. And it would help us out greatly, because we want to hear from, like, as diverse and a wide range of an audience as possible. Because this is a huge part of media history, and we wouldn't want anything to sort of go missing. And that doesn't mean to say that you have to enter some, like, obscure sound novel from Japan. That if you just want to hear about Resident Evil, let us know. Tell us that you want to hear about Resident Evil. It gives us incentive. Like, if that's such a huge demand, we're like, okay, well, we need to track down more Resident Evil guys to talk about their stuff. Yeah, it's super helpful. You'll also be able to be kept in the loop with, you know, when we drop the new trailer. We're dropping a new trailer pretty soon, and when pre-sales go live and all of that jazz, and it'll just it helps immensely, and you could genuinely shape a little bit of horror history, because these Creative EC, I'm fairly sort of new to them. I was creative advisor on In Search of Darkness 90s, and you know, I'm doing terabytes with them now, but they do some big huge projects with some crazy important and talented people, and I genuinely consider, like, before I was working with Creative EC, I was a huge fan, and I genuinely consider In Search of Darkness some of the coolest, the series, some of the coolest documentaries ever. It is a thrill to be working on them. They're a huge part of my fandom, and they are genuinely, like, important tomes in archiving, like, art and culture, and you can be a little bit of a part of that horror history.
Awesome. Yes, please check that out. And also check out, thank you to our friend ALOFETT for the podcast logo and art and design and all that. And thank you to our very own Jason, as they provide the intro-outro music. Jason, I know you forget sometimes.
I do provide the intro outro music, and I make music, the Upsides on SoundCloud, the _ Upsides PA on Twitter, and the Upsides PA on Instagram. I'm making things that will be out at some point soon, hopefully.
Right. And you can follow us, Culturally Illiterate is the name of the podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. You can follow us at illiterate_pod for anywhere that we have a social. You can reach us at culturalliteratepod@gmail.com if you have any particular questions or comments that you don't want to leave on a social for some reason. And lastly, 2008 was very, very busy and very, very influential for superhero movies, but next episode we are going to be covering its last and most forgotten entry and testing the limits of our tolerance for camp in this genre with Punisher Warzone. And if Jason can recall, and if longtime listeners may recall, there is a major supporting character in that movie played by an actor that I guarantee you will not guess in a million years. So, you know, stay tuned if you want to see if Jason gets lucky. Pause. Alright, bye.